they roam together, and I think that a lot of the coordination is done by Canyon. Canyon's sort of like, his ability to understand where his opponent is at all times is just uncanny. It's ridiculous.
Hi everyone, it's Tom with the 11th and final MSI Preview interview, and best for last you could say, because today we're going to be talking about the LCK, and joining me to do so is LCK caster Atlus, who is probably having some high hopes for his team, or well, I don't know, you could say his team, but the team your region is representing. But before we talk about DWG, Atlus, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. Thanks so much for having me on the show. Very happy to talk about the best team in the world. Always happy to do so. Have been doing so for quite some time this year. It's been very, very good. And yes, as you mentioned, high hopes. I think anything less than first would be a disappointment. So
Yeah.
high hopes comes with high expectations, but I think that DWG are in a pretty good place at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's only natural for people to expect the reigning world champion to do pretty well at an international tournament. But before we talk about deeper expectations, deeper hopes, or where we could see DWG go in the tournament, let's dial it back a bit, because obviously this is a slightly different lineup than the one that did win the world championship, with Nuguri now on Fun Plus Phoenix and Khan as the new top laner. And do you remember when Nuguri's departure was announced and Khan coming in as a subsequent move? Do you remember how you felt about that move and what your thoughts were?
I felt awful, not gonna lie. I think everyone sort of expected Khan to be a significant downgrade. Everyone that sort of had watched Khan play, especially in Korea before he went to FPX, I think he was okay over in China, but not really a standout. And especially here in Korea, he was known for not being able to get it together when things counted. On T1, that certainly happened. Longzhu was a big disappointment quite a few years ago now. I think the expectation for Khan was pretty low. But talking about exceeding expectations, things like that, I think that Khan's never going to be Nuguri. I think there's a lot of people that even right now would rightly say that the team isn't as good as they were, but I don't think it's necessarily an objective, like, definite downgrade, right? I think that Nuguri and Khan offer very different things to the team, and I think that's the hugest surprise from what we expected as Khan moved on over, because I was like, no, this is not the same DAMWON.
It's going to be terrible.
It's not going to be the same. Oh no, we're just going to go back to losing again, and this is all really depressing. But it's been definitely a lot better than most expected.
Yeah, and talking about this expectation heading into the spring split, obviously they still have 4 of the same people that did win the world championship. But did you think they might not win the spring split? Did you see other teams overtaking them because of this move?
I think a lot of people thought that, when they lost to Fred at Brion, that maybe they weren't the same team, right? When we had, God King Lava taking down Showmaker. I think that was probably the lowest point for Showmaker all season. But after that, when they just continued to knock people over, Gen.G won one series, which was impressive. But I think if you watch that series again, you'd be like, this isn't the same DWG that we saw in the playoffs. This isn't the team that actually wants to win, right? This is the team that had already locked in first place. And, they may as well just screw around and not give anything away. And I think a lot of that comes to the Coma effect, because, of course, Coma and Pumandu moved on over. They almost dragged Coma out of retirement, is sort of like the word on the street. But he came in to save another world championship team, see whether he can get another back-to-back. And I think with the team looking the way they are, it's definitely a possibility. But MSIs have always been, that's been something that's been on Coma's mind. You cast your mind back to 2015. That was so close to, having that ultra SKT pick up the victory over at MSI. Wasn't to be, and now I think I'm probably going to be pretty hungry to take that one away.
Yeah, and obviously coaching staff is another important factor of the team. So how did you expect these dynamics to shape up for DWG in the spring split, or with this change? Is there any particular style you thought they were maybe going to adopt or shift to, or did you expect them to just continue the same train with this?
I think it was actually pretty eye-opening
Mm-hmm.
watching the spring split after the coaching change, because of course Coach Kim had a lot of accolades, right? Like he coached a certain IG to a victory in 2018,
Mm-hmm.
then took this rookie squad in DAMWON to Worlds in 2019, and they did surprisingly well. Then won 2020, which is pretty good.
Yeah, pretty
Um,
decent, yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But then he got sniped by T1, and then the whole round the rosy had to happen, and of course Coma goes over to Damwon, and I think a lot of people were asking the question like, what is this going to mean? How much of an influence did Coach Kim have on the team? And I think the
Mm-hmm.
result was basically nothing. You know, I think that a lot of it comes down to these players leveling up their own performance and not necessarily what Coach Kim and what the coaching staff necessarily did for them there, or
Mm-hmm.
it's the fact that they've been pushed even further with this new coaching staff that has taken what they already know and then built upon it. There's a lot of intangibles. There's a lot that we just have to speculate on.
Right.
But I was personally like very pleasantly surprised with what Damwon were able to show us even after Coach Kim left. And you saw T1 and all of their struggles and things like that. And of course, Danny moved over with Coach Kim to the team, and
Mm-hmm.
he'd been interviewed a lot under a lot of scrutiny. And I think that coaching staff matters to a point, but they don't do everything for a team. And I think
Mm-hmm.
it's hard for people to really understand how much weight we need to put on
Right.
coaching staff or on just the players for knowing how to
Mm-hmm.
play the game super good.
Yeah, and there's obviously different coaches have different roles for a team. You have if you have a roster with only rookies, you're gonna need something very different than when you have a roster with veterans or world champions. So that aside, looking at Damwon, you said okay that they lost that one series early on, which raised
Yeah,
a lot
they
of question
did.
marks, and then a series later on. Did you see? Did you feel that this team still developed a lot over the course of the spring split? Did you see that integration of Khan perhaps took its time to develop, or was this a team that from the get go you thought, well, they have everything basically sorted out? Bring on MSI.
It's actually an interesting question because I think there was development, but not a lot of it was very obvious, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they started by winning Casper Cup, and they did that very easily, and then they cruised through the spring split, not even seeming to care about the fact that they could have broken their own
Yeah.
record and their tied record with 2015 SKT for like the most winningest team in a season.
Mm-hmm.
Seemed to just not really worry them at all, to be perfectly honest. But Khan's development, I think, was really interesting. And I'd like to take a second to speak a little bit more about it because I
Sure.
feel
Yeah.
like I
Go
didn't
ahead.
address the Khan versus Nuguri effect. And I think that when you put it on paper, right, anyone who's like a student of League of Legends and just wants to look at like how these players, disintegrate the map and take everything on, Nuguri's better,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just hands down. His hands work better than Khan's do. That's just a fact.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of intangibles. There's a lot of other things that Khan brings. And when you come from a society like Korea, which is very uh, hierarchical based on age, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being older than someone means a lot more here than it does, say in the West, right? And Khan comes in as one of the oldest players, in the league. And it's really funny because he was such a rambunctious player and such a rambunctious guy on Longzhu back in the day, even on Kingzone and things like that. Like
Mm-hmm.
he was the guy doing funny stuff and still does, right? But I think that he's picked up a really large level of responsibility and almost like a father figure for this team. It's sort of what it feels like, and a lot of the interviews with the players reflects this. And it's not who Noguri is, right? Noguri is he's a weirdo, to put it pretty blunt.
He's the
But
mad scientist in the
he is,
team.
he
Yeah.
is. And he's not necessarily that natural leader. And I think that Khan does have aspects of that, right? Like you see all of the charisma in all of his interviews. You want him to get player of the game every game just because he's so charismatic and you want to hear what he has to say,
Mm-hmm.
because he never really holds back, and things like that. And I think that that really helps him be a leader for a lot of these younger players, right? Canyon, he debuted at 17 in 2019. So he's only 19 years old right now, like there's close to a 10-year gap between these two players.
Yeah. It's
And I
pretty
think it
crazy.
must,
Mm.
yeah, it must mean a lot for them to have Khan there with all of his, wealth of experience and the fact that he's been overseas so many times, dealt with
Mm-hmm.
disappointment, dealt with playing in other regions and all this sort of stuff. So I think that has been useful, although it's very hard to gauge what it actually means for the team. You just look on paper and you're like, oh, really good player left, not as good player joined, team still real good. So there must be something, right? Something must have done it.
Yeah. So in terms of playstyle, then did you see them make any changes? Because if we talk about the top lane specifically, it was Gnar, it was Sion, and Renekton. Yeah. This split was basically summed up. And did you see overall this team develop a lot in their playstyle? Did they clean up things that were going wrong early on? Because even if you win, you can still make a lot of mistakes. We've seen it time and time again that teams that are heavily favored maybe clutch out a narrow win in the series. So how was that from your perspective? Was this a DAMWON that had a lot to improve over the course of the split in terms of their playstyle? And how did that go for them?
I think DAMWON actually slowed down a lot. They were very furious last year because, of course, Nuguri likes to die as many times as possible in the early game in order to get as strong as possible. Good to see, watching him over in the LPL, that things absolutely have not changed.
Yeah.
And I hope they never do, because that's what we love about Nuguri.
Perhaps even suits him better there. It's
yeah, definitely. But with Khan's Sion playstyle, right? Like that definitely slows things down. A lot of it has to do with the meta, right? Senna coming back, and that was of course one of Ghost's favorite champions. The fact that she's still so strong on the MSI patch is really scary. But I think that she'll also just be permabanned the entire tournament, so our teams won't need to worry about it too much. But, playing towards a style like that certainly does slow the game down, right? And there was a lot of scaling that was in a lot of the comps that a lot of the teams were running. But I think DAMWON showed that they can still play the fast game, and also still play weird stuff. Like Khan, you mentioned the fact that this guy's like basically a Sion one trick. But this guy played Fizz top. He actually has one of the deepest champion pools, if you have a look at the amount of champions played, of any top laner in the LCK, actually. Except there's just like one game on Fizz, one game on Jace, one game on Gangplank, and then 1,100 games on Sion. And sometimes you just have to do the Sion duty.
Yep.
But even when he does, right, like I can rifle off some stats, right? Like, he has like some of the worst like damage percent numbers, like sort of middling damage percent numbers. His gold percent as far as like what he gets on the team is abysmal in comparison to other teams. Even his CS numbers, right? Like he gives up waves in order to help Canyon around the jungle and help the rest of his team in the early game. But then you have a look at like his damage per minute stats. They're the highest of any top laner in the LCK. You have a look at his damage per minute difference compared to his opponents. Of course, that's going to be first place as well. His damage per gold, still like second place, right? Like this guy uses the resources that he gets extraordinarily well. And then you have to factor in that he plays Sion every game. And how does he do that much damage on Sion every game? Like it's insane what Khan has been able to almost like carve out for himself in the resources that DAMWON demands, right? Because if you think about DAMWON as a team, and I know that I'm waffling on a little bit here, but
it's fine. Yep.
They have Canyon, and Canyon is extraordinary. This guy is like almost undoubtedly the best player in the world at the moment. He certainly
I think at least universally considered the best jungler in the world, and definitely up there with just best player overall.
Yeah, I think he's just outstanding. And one of the really cool things about DAMWON is that you think about like mid jungle, right? Like the most famous mid jungles in the world, like Bengi Faker, Maple Casa, like most of those, the star of the show is actually the mid laner, right? Especially in Faker's case. Maple and Casa may be a little bit more debatable, but certainly was Maple towards the beginning. So glad that he's coming back to MSI, as an aside, but that is certainly a very different team. Showmaker and Canyon play around Canyon. Canyon is the star of the show for this team. And the thing that's really interesting is that the jungle is a duo lane for DAMWON because Beryl is always with him. Or not always, but often. They roam together, and I think that a lot of the coordination is done by Canyon. Canyon's sort of like his ability to understand where his opponent is at all times is just uncanny. It's ridiculous. And it bothers me because I don't understand how the hell he does it. But it's like this whole team is structured around Canyon and making sure that he can perform and, jungle Canyon his opponent, to use the terrible pun that we sort of fall into every single day. And I think that with Nuguri gone and Khan in, it only inflates that sort of playstyle, which is around this superstar jungler. And even though it doesn't necessarily reflect in Canyon's stats, this is the cool thing about Canyon, right? Like sometimes, you know, if you think about tyrannical leaders, they take all the resources for themselves and they don't give it back to the people. Canyon is not that. He's a benevolent leader. He makes sure that he gives things to the rest of his team, you know, not necessarily Khan. He goes up to Khan's lane and takes all the kills, but he goes down bottom lane and he tries to feed Ghost because Ghost is the one that wants to carry them late game and get randomly all sorts of pentakills throughout the season to make Ruler very, very jealous.
Yeah.
And I just think that, like, I know we're going back to the Khan edition, but I think that that has certainly helped with the general play style of DAMWON, which is let's utilize this extraordinarily good jungler and set him up for success in the early stages of the game. And they've been able to do so better and better throughout the spring split, and they just went 6-0 in the finals, and it looked like it wasn't going to be even close between the teams.
Yeah. Now, talking about I think when we talk about, normally I ask, okay, what are the strengths of this team? But I think with DAMWON, and especially at MSI, you could say, okay, well, in all the roles, they have probably the best, if, you know, not second best. You could make maybe some cases here and there, role or like player in that role. So let's talk a bit more about potential weaknesses then. This is as good as a team is and as perfect, as close to perfection DAMWON might be, especially compared to other teams heading to MSI. No team plays flawlessly. So where do you think that if there is a world where DAMWON doesn't win MSI, what needs to happen? What do other teams need to do, or what needs to happen? Like, which weakness needs to be exposed completely that DAMWON has in order for something like that to happen?
I think there's a few schools of thought. I think a bit of it was actually addressed in the final against Gen G, right? On paper, it looks like Gen G are a team that should be able to strike back against a team like DAMWON. Like BDD is, I would say, pretty close to Showmaker's level of just raw skill in the mid lane. We have to remember what he did to Faker and what Gen G as a team did to T1 in the semifinal. That was very, very impressive. But the bottom lane is where most people aim for when it comes to DAMWON, because Ghost is a role player. He needs to be a role player. Absolutely, because this DAMWON team, like, there's only so many resources that you can throw into Canyon, right? And not a lot of it necessarily overflows, and Beryl is never in the lane. So Ghost has to sit back the majority of the time. And a lot of people look at that as sort of the weakness of DAMWON. I think that Ghost was close to like second as far as like MVP rating at Worlds. I think Ghost overperformed massively. Like, this is a guy that like played for BBQ Olivers, you know, and was pretty forgettable in his previous years, and then comes onto DAMWON and was somehow just exactly what the team needed. It's the weirdest thing. But most people do look at the bottom lane as being a weakness. I think their early game is also something that the teams can punish. If you look at the context of MSI and the teams that are going to be there, there are some fast and furious teams coming through. There's a lot of scrappiness, right? Like, I've been recently going back and watching all of the finals of all of the regions, and it hasn't been the highest level League of Legends from what I've been used to seeing. However, it has definitely been a lot of killing each other.
Yes, there's a lot of aggression, a lot of taking the fights to each other.
Yeah, and I think that DAMWON's slow early game and, you know, lack of pace at that point, just, you know, the Korean want to have everything perfect, right? Get your ducks in a row before you go for any of the plays. Like, that is a gentleman's agreement that is pretty Korean based, right? You know, it's the no rush 10 that we often find ourselves facing, and I think that could be somewhere that that other teams could look to punish. And I think like if I'm scared of a team, it's RNG, right? I think if Gala plays like he did in that final, like, holy crap, I don't know who's going to be able to win that bottom lane, right? Like, that is this guy, and like Ming as well. Like, I mean, as a duo, that bot lane is just insane. I think Gala was definitely the flashiest, but Ming was just over and over again, like,
very consistent factor in that. That
I think Beryl's going to really be challenged by that team, and I think Beryl's very, very strong. I don't necessarily think that he's looked as good as he did in 2019. You know, like, that was the Alistair God himself really taking names. he's certainly been a little bit more subdued, but you know, in the final, he definitely played well, and we know what Beryl's capable of, right? You know, with the power of anime, anything is possible.
With his trusted Leona skin by his side now, yeah, anything can happen. So, talking about expectations, you already said anything but winning MSI would be a disappointment. But then let's take a small segue, or like a small detour. You mentioned RNG. Is that the team you expect DAMWON to face in the grand finals as well? Looking since you've also looked at the other teams and the finals of the other regions, I think many people are expecting the Cloud9 and the Mad Lions to be in the semifinals. I'm not sure what your perspective on that is, and how you see the path of DAMWON towards the potential title. But talk to me a little bit about this.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. There are some dark horses. I think that it's DWGK and RNG, in my opinion, that sort of sit a cut above a lot of the other teams. I think that there needs to be a fair bit proven. I know there's a lot of doubt when it comes to the Mad Lions, especially, you know, looking back to what this team was last time we saw them internationally, and you know, the fact that a lot of people thought that maybe they weren't the best team in Europe when they came through. I'm of course not an LEC aficionado, so I don't necessarily understand all of that. I just read some Reddit comments here and there.
Well, they are a very different team than they were last Worlds. They are much better, much more well-rounded, and I mean that's how they won the LEC. They played much more well-rounded around their top side, much better. Bot side, you could argue, is maybe in looking a bit worse than it was last year, but they were also 4 rookies at Worlds last year in pretty terrible circumstances. Obviously, the circumstances were the same for everybody, but yeah, for 4 rookies there was a big lesson for them to learn, but they've definitely learned it.
Yeah, and I'm very interested to see how that one's going to go as well. Like, I'm really glad also that C9 is going to be facing DWGK in Game 1.
Yeah, the opening match is going to be a banger, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to spoil something. Our good friend Chronicler, we were having a chat. We talk about, you know, our expectations a lot, because his mind works a lot different to mine, and I find it very interesting having conversations with him. But he thinks that, you know, there is a high chance that C9 just wins that game because DWGK are a team that they play to the match that they're in at the time, right? Like, if you look back to their Genji loss that they had, it looked like they just didn't really care, right? And if there's no fire under them, they're a very different team. There's not going to be any fire at the very beginning, you know, the opening game.
Yeah.
So maybe they just pick Fizz Top and run it down. You know, that could actually be a thing. It's probably not going to be Fizz Top. It'll probably be Khan, you know, trying to use his old man hands to play Lee Sin top lane or something like that. And we'll see whether that works. No, of course he doesn't have old man hands. He's still very, very good. But that could certainly be a thing. I don't think that is going to stop DWGK winning the whole thing. To be perfectly honest, they're not a team that tilts. Which is very weird, you know, because they've got a lot of very competitive players. Like, you look at Showmaker, like, he gets angry if he doesn't get a 2-0 and can't go home to play solo queue more, you know, and just keep dominating people. He's actually terrifying in voice comms. Like, these guys are desperate, you know, for victories. So that sort of anger and aggression doesn't necessarily turn into tilt afterwards, which is very impressive. And of course, you know, Canyon's always just super zen, and it doesn't make any sense. That guy's very soft-spoken, and just I assume that he's just got the Matrix code going down his eyes instead of actually being able to. Yeah, no, exactly. And that's showing him jungle pathing at all times. So during interviews, he's like, "I'm distracted by the jungle right now. I can't talk to you." Yeah, and maybe that's why we don't necessarily get the very in-depth and vibrant interviews that we get with players like, you know, Khan and sometimes Showmaker as well, wearing his funny glasses. But to move past sort of like the well-known regions, I think like PSG Talent are going to be a team to watch out for, right? And I was talking about Maple before. Super excited that he's back again. I think Hanabi as well, as like a veteran, is like super fun to watch. Kai Wing's back as well. Like, there's so many players that we've been watching for so long. And this is a team that dominated, right? Like, they did very, very well in their own region. And I think this is a region as well that does have the tools to play extraordinarily quickly in the earlier stages of the game, right? And I think that might be something that could be used against DAMWON. I don't think it's ever realistically going to mean that they're going to lose. However, it's a fun thing to think about, right? Maybe it's going to be a good idea.
Yeah, maybe there are going to be some curveballs, maybe a small spanner in the works, and at least a very explosive match. Those are the things to look forward to. Well, Atlus, thank you so much for joining me today to talk more about DAMWON. And yeah, I'm just like you. I'm very much looking forward to see what they're going to bring to the stage. Obviously, on patch 11.9, there's a lot of things happening. So yeah, maybe we see Kenyon on the Morgana or the Rumble. I've seen it on the Track the Pro site that he's experimenting a lot with those picks. So that's going to be very exciting. But again, thank you so much for joining me, Atlus.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute blast. And looking forward to checking out MSI, and I'll see what you've got for us as far as content for that as well. Looking forward to it.
Thank you very much.